Princess of Wales pledged herself to serve her country and her people, and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation.
Before the palace clock struck 6, King Charles had already made the decision no one believed he would dare to make. A sealed decree was carried through a silent corridor, placed before Camilla, and read aloud without ceremony. Her title privilege was revoked. The distinction she had fought to secure would pass instead to Catherine. But the most devastating detail was not written on the page. It was hidden in the king's final 4 words: "This ends now, completely." Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At 5:40 that morning, Charles summoned his secretary into a locked room at Clarence House and stared at the royal instrument beside an uncapped fountain pen. A royal instrument is a formal document through which the sovereign gives an order force, and this one had been prepared before offices opened, so no advisor or household ally could delay it. The king lifted the pen, then stopped. Memories of Camilla's sacrifices collided with the duty, demanding that he act against her. Still, he signed. The order removed her exclusive title privilege and ceremonial precedence, meaning the recognized order determining who enters first, receives access, and appears closest to the sovereign at ceremonies. With one stroke, those advantages passed to Catherine, and future court papers, ceremonies, and household arrangements were ordered to reflect the change immediately. Camilla received the decree in her private sitting room and read its opening paragraph twice. Her fingers tightened around the page as she asked the aide whether Charles had approved every word. The answer came softly, but landed like a blow. She did not cry. She ordered the door closed and remained alone, with proof that the security she had fought decades to gain could still be taken before breakfast. Catherine knew nothing. She had neither requested the privilege nor been warned, because Charles wanted no one to mistake his judgment for her ambition. Yet another secret remained. A second sealed instruction was delivered only to William, and when the prince broke the seal, his expression changed. It concerned Camilla's future role beside the monarch and revealed that the transfer was not an isolated punishment, but the opening move in a wider restructuring. William understood that his father had drawn a line through years of fragile compromise. Now every household, ally, and royal near the throne would have to choose where loyalty truly rested. But to understand why Charles was willing to wound the woman beside him and elevate the woman destined to follow him, the palace first had to confront what each of them stood to lose. The decree named 2 women, but it exposed 3 private battles. Camilla saw the privilege as proof that decades of rejection had finally ended. Catherine viewed royal distinction as duty rather than reward. Charles stood between them, knowing that whichever woman he protected would define the final chapter of his reign. Behind the polished titles were 3 people carrying old humiliation, future responsibility, and one unbearable question: who did the monarchy trust to embody its survival? Camilla sat alone before the mirror and stared at the brooch pinned above her heart. She had worn it during one of the first major ceremonies, where she was treated not as an outsider, but as the woman beside the king. Now she removed it slowly and placed it inside a drawer. The privilege had mattered because it was more than a title. It carried ceremonial precedence, the formal order deciding who stands closest to the sovereign, enters first, and receives the most visible duties. For her, that position had become proof that years of judgment were finally over. Her composure held until the drawer closed. Then she whispered, "They have made me temporary again." Catherine received the news across the breakfast table from William. Her teacup stopped halfway to her lips, as he explained that the distinction had been transferred to her with immediate effect. She did not smile. She asked whether Charles had considered what this would do to Camilla, because every royal distinction given to the future king's wife carries a message about the monarchy's next chapter. Catherine understood that the privilege strengthened her authority, but she also knew the public could interpret it as a younger woman rising through another woman's humiliation. William watched her closely. He wanted to protect his wife, yet the timing troubled him. The prince knew that accepting the change would secure Catherine's future position, but he also feared whispers that she had quietly pushed for Camilla's fall. Charles, meanwhile, met no one. He remained alone with a red dispatch box, the secure case used to carry official royal papers, and unfolded an old handwritten note. In it, he had once promised the queen consort that she would never again be publicly diminished. The king read the words twice, but the promise no longer answered the danger before him. His decision had not come from one angry moment. He had watched Camilla begin treating temporary authority as permanent possession, while Catherine accepted growing responsibility without demanding reward. Then a senior courtier submitted a documented account of one recent ceremony, describing how the queen had quietly removed the princess from a role Charles himself had approved. That hidden insult had changed everything. The Dawn Decree may have delivered the punishment, but the true beginning lay weeks earlier. During one ceremony where a whispered instruction crossed a line Charles could no longer ignore. Every royal rupture has a moment that looks insignificant until history turns back and recognizes it as the breaking point. This one unfolded beneath chandeliers, formal music, and perfectly controlled smiles. Catherine arrived expecting to perform a duty approved by the king. Camilla arrived carrying a different plan. Before the evening ended, one quiet instruction would remove the future queen from her place and force Charles to choose between protecting his wife and protecting the crown. 3 weeks before the Dawn Decree, Charles hosted an investiture reception honoring charity leaders and Commonwealth representatives. An investiture is a formal royal event where distinguished people receive honors or special recognition for their service. The monarch had personally approved Catherine's role in presenting a new distinction, giving her a visible responsibility that signaled growing confidence in her ability to stand beside William and carry the monarchy into its next chapter. Camilla knew exactly what that appearance meant. Minutes before the presentation, the queen consort called the master of ceremonies aside and ordered him to remove Catherine's name from the formal announcement. A master of ceremonies is the official who controls the order of an event and announces each participant. She placed herself in the presenting position, insisting the alteration reflected current precedents and could not be questioned before the guests. Catherine reached the antechamber moments later and immediately noticed that her place card had vanished. She asked the equerry whether an error had been made. An equerry is a royal aide who helps organize official duties and personal arrangements. He could not meet her eyes. After a painful pause, he admitted that Camilla had ordered the change. Catherine refused to create a public scene. She stepped aside and watched the queen perform the duty Charles had assigned to her, holding her expression steady while the insult settled beneath the ceremony's polite applause. Later, she told William that she would rather endure humiliation than damage an evening meant to honor others. Her restraint did not calm him. It sharpened his anger. When the guests departed, the prince carried the amended program into Charles's private room, placed it on the desk, and asked whether his father had approved the handwritten correction. The king read it once, then again. Silence answered before he did. When Charles confronted Camilla privately, she defended the decision as protection of the established hierarchy and warned that Catherine's rising popularity was disturbing the balance of the court. Her words exposed something deeper. She no longer saw the younger woman only as family, but as a rival source of authority. Hours later, a senior courtier delivered a documented account listing 3 earlier occasions when Camilla's household had altered Catherine's access, speaking role, or ceremonial position. The reception was not a misunderstanding. It was the boldest move in an emerging campaign. Charles ordered constitutional and household advisors to identify the one privilege whose removal would stop it permanently. Once Charles understood that the ceremony had been altered deliberately, the question was no longer whether he would challenge Camilla, but whether their marriage could survive what he was about to say to her face. There were no advisors in the room, no courtiers to soften the language, and no cameras to preserve the illusion of unity. Charles waited beside the fireplace, with the amended ceremony program in his hand. Camilla entered believing she had been summoned to discuss scheduling. Instead, The king placed the paper between them and accused her of using authority granted by him to weaken the woman who would one day inherit the burden of the crown. 2 nights had passed since the reception, but the anger had not faded. Charles chose the library instead of an official office because this was no longer a discussion between 2 royal households. It was a reckoning between husband and wife. He had reviewed the household records and found that Camilla's staff repeatedly invoked her title privilege, the special authority attached to her ceremonial position, to justify changes neither he nor William had approved. The monarch slid the altered program across the table. "You used my crown against my heir." She pushed it back without lowering her eyes. The queen consort insisted she had defended the dignity of the king's wife from a palace increasingly organized around Catherine. Then her voice tightened. She reminded Charles of the years of hostility she had endured for him, and asked whether every promise he had made disappeared the moment the younger woman received warmer applause. He flinched. The accusation reached the guilt he had spent years trying to bury. Yet, he did not withdraw the charge. Charles told her that the privilege had been granted to protect her place, not to become a weapon against the future monarch's wife. Camilla rose so suddenly that the chair scraped across the floor. He did not step toward her. That missing gesture said more than anger ever could. She then revealed, through an account of several private conversations, that senior palace figures had urged her to defend her position before William and Catherine became untouchable. Charles demanded their names. She refused, leaving him to understand that resistance to the succession reached beyond her own staff. The silence grew colder when the king admitted that constitutional advisors were reviewing the privilege itself. Constitutional advisors are specialists who explain what powers the sovereign may legally use within the monarchy. Camilla stared at him and asked whether he intended to remove it. He gave no answer. She understood anyway. Transferring the distinction to Catherine, she warned, would not be reform. It would be public repudiation. Charles replied that the public consequence began when she overrode his command. Camilla left without another word. The monarch then summoned the keeper of the royal records, the official responsible for preserving and preparing formal crown documents, and ordered the final legal mechanism drafted. But emotion alone could not complete the decision. He still needed the support of the man whose future authority would benefit most. The confrontation shattered the silence between husband and wife, but the final power now rested with Charles, William, and a sealed constitutional opinion that could either stop the decree or make it irreversible. The monarchy did not change because Charles lost his temper. It changed because, after the anger faded, he opened a sealed legal opinion and discovered that the authority was unquestionably his. One signature could remove Camilla's privilege. One accompanying instruction could place Catherine beyond future interference. But before the king touched his pen, he required William to answer a question no son should face. Would he support a decision that protected his wife by humiliating his father's? Charles read the opinion alone and felt the weight of every sentence. Constitutional advisors had concluded that the privilege existed by sovereign grant, meaning it had been personally awarded by the monarch rather than secured as a permanent right. He could withdraw it, transfer it through a formal royal instrument, and do so without Camilla's approval. Household officials also warned that moving it to Catherine would alter precedence protocols, the rules deciding ceremonial order, along with invitations, private briefings, and authority over selected patronages. The legal answer was simple. The human cost was not. Charles reached the final page, removed his glasses, and pressed his fingers against his eyes. After midnight, William entered the room and found his father still seated beside the unopened pen. The king asked whether Catherine would accept the distinction. The prince answered that she would obey the sovereign, but she would never celebrate receiving power through another woman's disgrace. Charles then asked the harder question. Did his son believe Camilla had deliberately obstructed her? William paused before replying. The future king said one incident might have been confusion, but repeated changes formed a pattern too consistent to dismiss. Silence, he warned, would teach every royal household that Catherine could be overridden without consequence, weakening both her position and the succession she represented. Charles then opened the second instruction. It ordered a review of Camilla's separate household authority and required written approval before any office could exercise power in the sovereign's name. The order was not merely removing a title, it was dismantling an unofficial network that had grown around verbal commands, private loyalties, and unchecked access. William did not demand that the Queen be pushed from public life. Instead, he asked his father to preserve her dignity while ending her ability to obstruct the future crown. That restraint changed something in Charles. It allowed him to see the decree not as punishment, but as correction. The king signed the Dawn Authorization and placed the sealed restructuring order in his son's hands. William accepted it without triumph, knowing he would now enforce the boundary his father had drawn. By sunrise, copies reached Catherine, Camilla, and one senior aide whose influence depended on the old arrangement. The moment that aide read the final page, desperate calls began. The documents were now signed, but royal power becomes real only when doors close, names disappear from schedules, and the people who once commanded a room discover that no one is waiting for their instructions. The first consequence was not a headline, it was silence. At 9 o'clock, Camilla's senior staff gathered around a table, expecting the usual flow of invitations, approvals, and ceremonial requests. Instead, the folders were empty, calls were redirected, meetings vanished from the calendar. The privilege had been removed before breakfast, but only now did the Queen understand what that meant. The palace machinery that once moved at her command had stopped without explanation or farewell. Camilla entered the morning briefing and immediately noticed that her customary red folders had been replaced by one thin schedule. The decree was already active across the royal households, meaning the separate offices serving senior family members, and events involving succession, joint representation, and selected ceremonial duties now had to pass through Catherine's team. Officials who once treated Camilla's spoken wishes as binding had also received a strict instruction. Only written authority from Charles could change an approved plan. The informal freedom that allowed her influence to spread had ended overnight. She looked at her private secretary and asked where the Commonwealth reception papers had gone. He hesitated, then admitted they had been transferred to Catherine before 8. Camilla dismissed everyone, but one longtime aide remained near the table. She asked whether her staff had known what was coming. When he said they had not, her face hardened. Then I was not defeated by a conspiracy, I was defeated by the king. Charles came to her door later that morning, carrying words he had clearly rehearsed. She refused to let him enter. Through the closed door, the queen consort told him that a private apology could not repair a public demotion. The monarch stood there in silence before finally walking away, leaving both of them separated by far more than wood. William moved just as firmly. After the senior aide behind the desperate calls was identified as the official who repeatedly carried Camilla's instructions to ceremonial planners, the prince ordered an audit, a formal review of every schedule change made during the previous year. The findings widened the damage. Catherine had not been the only one pushed aside. Sophie and Anne had also seen duties moved or reduced to protect Camilla's position, proving that her household had confused closeness to Charles with ownership of the institution. Catherine received stacks of transferred files, yet she refused to claim Camilla's rooms or absorb her full staff. She asked for only the responsibilities necessary to protect the succession, making it clear that she would not turn correction into conquest. When the loyal aide carried that decision back, Camilla fell silent. For the first time, she considered that Catherine might not be the enemy she had imagined. Then she agreed to meet her privately, without Charles, William, or palace officials in the room. The decree had taken Camilla's authority, but the next shift would come without documents or witnesses, when the two women at the center of the rupture finally faced each other alone. Catherine entered without a secretary, a briefing folder, or the privilege now attached to her name. Camilla was already waiting, seated beside a cold fireplace with the Dawn Decree folded on the table. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. One had lost the symbol that made her feel secure. The other had inherited it without asking. What followed was not a victory speech or an apology, but the first honest conversation either had allowed herself to have. Catherine had requested the meeting after learning that Camilla had shut herself away from nearly everyone around her. She insisted that no aides remain outside the immediate room and told William not to intervene unless she called for him. The prince agreed, though every instinct urged him to protect his wife from another calculated humiliation. Camilla accepted only because Catherine had refused to take her rooms, staff, or private spaces. That restraint had weakened the queen's belief that the younger woman engineered the transfer for personal gain. Catherine placed an unopened insignia packet on the table. An insignia is the emblem or badge that represents a royal honor and its authority. She said she would neither wear it nor publicly use the privilege until Camilla heard the truth directly from her. The gesture caught her off guard. The queen consort asked whether Catherine finally felt vindicated after being removed from the ceremony. The princess did not avoid the pain. She admitted that the public sidelining had wounded her, but answered that humiliation did not become justice simply because it changed direction. She had never wanted Charles to correct one wrong by destroying his wife. Camilla's control finally cracked. Through the private conversation, she confessed that Catherine's popularity frightened her because it made decades of hard-won acceptance feel temporary. She had believed that once the public saw a future queen they loved, no emotional place would remain for the woman beside the current king. Catherine listened without offering easy comfort. She explained that they had never belonged to the same chapter of the monarchy. Camilla's duty was to complete the present with dignity, while hers was to prepare for what came next. The real mistake had been trying to control a future that could not be stopped. Camilla reached for the decree, folded it carefully, and said she would not challenge Charles's order. She agreed to release the disputed patronages, charitable roles formally supported by a royal, and instructed her remaining staff to cooperate with Catherine's office. The younger woman offered no false promise of friendship. Instead, she assured Camilla that she would not be erased from ceremonies where her presence remained proper. The queen accepted the difference between keeping dignity and keeping control. They left separately, but no longer as enemies fighting for the same space. Inside the palace, the battle had finally softened into acceptance. Outside its gates, however, the world was about to turn one dawn decree into the defining royal story of the generation. By breakfast, the decree belonged to the world. Broadcasters abandoned scheduled programs, newspapers rebuilt their front pages, and crowds gathered beneath palace balconies that remained stubbornly empty. Some called it a ruthless humiliation. Others called it the clearest act of succession planning in decades. Yet one image captured the national mood more powerfully than every argument. Camilla's car passing Catherine's outside the palace gates, neither woman looking toward the other. Buckingham Palace released a brief statement confirming that Charles had reassigned the title privilege to Catherine as part of a formal clarification of present and future royal responsibilities. Buckingham Palace is both a royal residence and the central office, through which major announcements from the monarchy are issued. The statement accused no one and praised Camilla's years of service, but one phrase changed its entire meaning: future continuity of the crown. It made clear that the royal structure was now being organized around William and his wife. A major newspaper captured the shock with a black and gold front page showing the king's signature above the words, "The crown chooses its future." Copies rose above the crowd gathering at the Victoria Memorial, as strangers argued over whether Charles had acted with courage or cruelty. During a live morning broadcast, one presenter called the decree the moment Charles placed the monarchy ahead of his marriage. The sentence was replayed until it became the public verdict. William watched the coverage beside Catherine, as commentators accused her of taking Camilla's place. The prince remained silent until she switched off the television and said that accepting duty was easy compared with surviving the stories attached to it. Her words revealed why the change mattered beyond status. Every attack against Catherine could weaken public trust in the future reign, while every sign of triumph could make the transfer appear like revenge. Camilla saw photographs of the younger woman beside celebratory headlines and briefly believed she had lost everything. Her loyal aide reminded her that Catherine had delayed using the privilege and had personally protected the queen consort's place at upcoming engagements. Meanwhile, palace officials confirmed through a recorded briefing that the household audit had ended without a public purge. Charles allowed several staff members to resign quietly, but permanently restricted informal authority, choosing discipline over spectacle. Public anger began to shift when Catherine attended a charity engagement without displaying the new distinction. Her restraint weakened claims of ambition and showed that she viewed the privilege as work, not victory. With the country moving toward reluctant acceptance, Charles summoned the family for one final private gathering. The country had delivered its judgment in headlines and crowds, but the true verdict would be spoken behind palace doors, where Charles still owed Camilla an ending, and Catherine a reason to carry what he had placed upon her. The final meeting did not restore what had been taken, and it did not pretend the pain had disappeared. Charles entered knowing Camilla would never forget the Dawn Decree. Catherine entered understanding that privilege could become a burden the moment it was accepted. William stood beside her, not as a victorious heir, but as a son, watching his father close one chapter of the monarchy. This time, no one came to argue. They came to decide what remained. 2 days after the announcement, Charles gathered the three of them in a private drawing room with no advisors present. The legal battle was over. What remained was the emotional settlement between a husband, a wife, an heir, and the woman who would stand beside that heir. The king confirmed that the privilege would remain permanently with Catherine as part of the structure supporting the next reign. No later review would return it to Camilla. He then placed 2 documents on the table. The first was the completed decree. The second protected the queen consort's charitable work, appropriate ceremonial presence, and personal dignity while separating those roles from succession authority. The power connected directly to preparing and supporting the future sovereign. Camilla read the second document slowly, then set it down. She told Charles that she could not call his decision kind, but she finally understood why he believed it necessary. Through that private conversation, she admitted that fear of being displaced had driven her to overreach, damaging the trust she had fought so hard to secure. Charles did not defend himself. He apologized for leaving the boundaries around her authority unclear for too long. Guilt, he confessed, had made him offer reassurance when he should have established limits, turning private devotion into institutional confusion. Catherine then formally accepted the privilege, but asked that its first use support a national service initiative rather than a banquet or procession. Her choice transformed the distinction from a trophy into a promise of work. William turned to Camilla and told her that the future monarchy would not erase her contribution, but it could never be governed by fear of what came next. She accepted his words without warmth, yet also without resistance. The disputed household network was dissolved, ceremonial authority was clarified, and Catherine assumed her expanded responsibilities. Camilla remained beside Charles, but she no longer competed with the succession for control. The Dawn Decree had ended the illusion that love, guilt, title, and authority could remain tangled without consequence. The king chose the crown's future over personal comfort. The queen surrendered power, but retained dignity. Catherine inherited authority and proved worthy of it by refusing revenge. The monarchy emerged changed, but not broken, and when the palace doors closed that evening, nothing remained undecided. Camilla's chapter retained its dignity, Catherine's duty had begun, and Charles's final verdict stood. Love could shape the monarchy, but it would never again be allowed to overrule its future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.